It's great to see you. Welcome to our first Visiting Artist Lecture. We're so lucky and excited to have William Cordova with us here tonight. So I'm not going to say too much, but we would like to acknowledge the land on which the University at Buffalo operates, which is the territory of the Seneca Nation, a member of the Haudenosaunee Six Nations Confederacy. This territory is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Treaty of Peace and Friendship, a pledge to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. It is also covered by the 1794 Treaty of Canandaigua between the United States government and the Six Nations Confederacy, which further affirms Haudenosaunee land rights and sovereignty in the state of New York. Today, this region is still the home to the Haudenosaunee people, and we are grateful for the opportunity to live, work, and share ideas in this territory. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, a faculty member, Victoria Dondian, who is going to introduce William. So please give me a round of applause. Give me a hand and welcome to the stage.
Hello everyone, thank you, Becky. It's such a pleasure to have William join us tonight. I first met William last summer while I was a resident artist at Fountainhead Residency in Miami. And we stayed connected. And since then, William has become such an important mentor to me personally. So I'm super excited to have William join us tonight. And so to most of the students here, I do want to say that we emphasize how important it is to find a great mentor. A mentor can truly transform the course of your career, so I encourage all of you to seek one out. It's never a bad idea. So William is an interdisciplinary cultural practitioner who's interested in the roots of abstraction, history of textile encoding and non-linear narrative. Having lived and worked fluently between 3 different cities, New York, Miami, and his hometown of Lima, Peru, William creates artworks that deals with the real-life issues of transition and displacement. He investigates the differences in culture, language, and economics through his work. Installations, drawings, and sculptures that combine discarded materials and ephemera. Such significance often site-specific works. William's installation offers new cross-cultural narrative that resists the traditional linear understanding of history. Yuan Agikas on Art Forum House is to write about William's work. William Cordova is a storyteller, a recuperator of ancestral memories. The artist invites us to question how we might revisit belief systems that vanished aeons ago. Themes that animate his installations, objects, or collages are in tune with the material dimensions of his work, along with untillating titles that refer to sound, occult secrets, warriors, ghosts, ancient architecture, folklore, music, textiles, and the landscape of Peru. Born in 1971 in Lima, Peru, William Cordova earned a BFA from the Art Institute of Chicago in 1996 and an MFA from Yale University in Havana in 2004, and spent a year at Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture in 2003. Residencies have been the cornerstone of William's practice, as he spent several years post-grad as a resident artist at various esteemed institutions. This includes the Studio Museum in Harlem, New York, the Museum of Fine Art, Houston, Project Row Houses, the American Academy in Berlin, Germany, Art-Based Headlines. I mean, the list is so long, I can't tell you all the residencies that William has done. So we do have, for those of you who might be interested in like notions of residencies as opportunities to scale your practice, William is someone you should have lots of questions for him at the end of today's talk. He's so experienced in that world. William has also had several exhibitions, solo exhibitions and group exhibitions. And this includes a solo exhibition at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Miami, exhibition at La Conservadora in Murcia in Spain. He's also participated in several artist biennials across the globe. The Whitney Biennial, Venice Biennial, to name a few. He's also been part of several group exhibitions as well. Exhibitions include a show at the MoMA PS1 in New York, National Museum, Duke University, amongst others. The list is quite long. So William is such an accomplished artist who's worked on a global level. William has also won several awards, which includes the Creative Capital Grant, which was just won recently, the Knight Foundation, Arts Matters, the Guggenheim Fellowship, the Joan Mitchell Foundation Grant, the Michael Richard Grant, etc., etc. Please join me in welcoming William Cordova tonight. Thank you.
Good evening. Can you hear me? Good evening. Thank you, Victoria. Thank you. I'll try to make it as brief and painless as possible. I thought about what kind of presentation I was going to give. I usually just freestyle everything. I don't bring a sheet to it or anything. I usually have notes, but they're in my pocket. I never reach for it. And I thought, what kind of presentation am I going to give? So I put the images together this morning at the hotel. And I thought, well, usually people want things that they need, they can use, and filter out the rest. So I thought, let me try to share my experiences of places that I've been to and people I've worked with, maybe examples, and maybe that will give you more information or tools that you can use later on after you graduate, whether it's undergrad or grad school. I can elaborate a little bit on my practice and the content of my work, but sometimes it can get boring to an audience. And I usually, I never repeat anything the same way or share the information the same way about any of my works. I thought we should just also keep this very informal by having you guys ask questions, if you like, during my talk, rather than waiting until the end, because you might forget or you just might not want to ask, or maybe the moment is gone or something like that. So I thought, let's just make it like a conversation. I'm a cultural practitioner from Lima, Peru, and my upbringing shaped my worldview. Then growing up later on in Miami added to that. I always started my presentations with a family photo. This one's a photograph of my mom and my oldest brother, two of my inspirations for my practice. They were both very creative problem solvers and artists, problem solve. That's why usually artists are the first ones who they take out during any kind of like conflict. They're the first ones to be censored, whether they're visual artists or cinematographers, filmmakers, writers, poets. You can check it online. Don't take my word for it. But I was going to ask, can I show up hands of graphic design majors? Okay. Painters? Okay. Undergrads? Okay. How about grad students? get an idea. Thank you. So what I'm going to talk mostly about is the art residencies that I did while I was, after my grad school experience. But I usually start with some of the earliest influences, which were comic books. I used comic books to cope with a lot of problems, with a lot of trauma coming up in Miami. There was a lot of violence when I was growing up in Miami. Gangs, drugs, the crack epidemic. So I usually isolated myself and just made comic books, aside from collecting comic books. I still have my original comic books, not these, but I'm sure you've seen one or two films of some kind of superhero today. I have a lot of those really early issues that I used to save up my pennies for. And I just kept them. Anyway, I didn't feel that collecting was enough. I needed to express myself. Aside from relating to someone, I needed to. And so I started making my own comic books. I made over 1,000 comic books, but I never read them afterwards. Nobody ever saw them. And these are the few that I've kept. So the top one, this is Micronauts. I used to draw them on butcher paper because I didn't have any paper. Later on, I got some more. Anyway, so I wanted to just share that with you. And then I started expressing myself in short messages. And I used the moniker Tupac, or Tupac. Are you all familiar with Tupac Shakur? Are you familiar with Tupac Amaru? Show of hands? Okay. Shakur's mom, Afeni Shakur, was a Black Panther in New York, and she named her son Tupac Amaru Shakur. Tupac Amaru was a Peruvian guerrilla warrior in the 1780s. He led the first Afro-Andean revolution against the Spanish. Afeni found out about this history and named her son Tupac Amaru Shakur. When I first saw Tupac, not in person, but in music, I thought he was Peruvian because of the name. You don't just have that kind of name. But later on, I found out the historical background. I was doing this soon after I graduated from high school. I didn't study art. I did it on the side just to cope with my own ills. And I would write these things. I didn't know anything about Joan Mitchell Foundation. I think Basquiat was actually still alive when I was doing this. Went to junior college in Miami-Dade Community College, and I was a terrible student. My GPA was .94, and I was flunking out, majoring in psychology because I wanted to help my family. Thought if I pursue medicine, that'll help. But I didn't have a passion for it, and eventually it really messed up my grades. In fact, I just have a passion or a desire to follow medicine. And one of my teachers pulled me out of class, a humanities class, and he told me if I wanted to take a class in the art department, that he would pay for it if I didn't like it. He would give me my money back. That I should at least try one class. So I did, and that changed my whole view of the arts. And mind you, this is in junior college. I was already in there for 3.5 years. Junior college is 2 years. Eventually, I was in there for 6 years, but I came out with a 4.0 and transferred to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago without any money. And my mom took out a loan because she didn't have any money. And so I went. And most of my work was these little postcards with office supply materials. That's all I could afford or liberate from the hardware stores. And eventually I did that for a few years and arrived at a point after undergrad that I couldn't evolve on my own. It's just, I got stuck. And that happens. And I knew I needed more critical feedback. So I went and applied for grad school. And to about 4 schools in the West Coast, Rutgers in the East Coast, Hunter College, and Yale University. I didn't get accepted into any school except for Yale. So I ended up going there. And very expensive. While there, I did the Skowhegan School of Art in Maine, which was a residency between my first and second year. And that's when I started really looking at art in a little more different perspective than what I was accustomed to, which was in Miami or in Chicago. Because you do 4 years, that's intense. You need a couple of years to kind of start working on your own without the side effects of undergrad, without the impression of undergrad, to see how well one can develop on their own. I obviously could not after a while because I needed feedback, more critical feedback and more peer-to-peer exchange. And so I applied to the MFA program, and when I was in Skowhegan, I was not obligated to produce anything specific for anything, but to just meditate and develop on my own independently. Mind you, the first year was intense of grad school, so I had that I was working through. And I started a series of 100 drawings. This is called World Famo Artists. And it's from a book that I got with 100 paintings in it. And I took out the color plates and just incorporated my own collages, my own drawings. And this is all 100. And it took about a year and a half to complete. So I started it at Skowhegan in 03, and I finished it in 04, at the end of 04, at the Studio Museum in Harlem after I graduated. These are some of the details of those works. This oil stick collage, graphite on reclaimed paper. You can see before. This is a different one. This is Staples, collaging, and graphite. And they're not at all related. They're all completely independent of each other. And most of my small graphite works look like this, collage work. And I always attribute them to comic books because of the gridding of each page. But it was with the work that I did in my thesis that I applied to residencies after grad school. So I thought I need to go somewhere where I can. I didn't want to get a job. I didn't want to get a 9 to 5. I didn't want to be a teacher because I saw the second years when I was a first year in grad school do a lot of TA, and I wrote a letter to the chair, to the dean, to opt out. So why do you want to opt out? This is a great opportunity. It's going to look good on your resume. So I don't want a resume. I just want to work on my studio. Because I saw the first year's great bunch of artists. Their theses were not very strong because they didn't have time to work in the studio. I didn't want that to happen to me. I thought, I struggled to get this far. I need to go in there guns blazing. So they let me opt out, and I just spent the next 8 months working on my thesis and a lot of other things related to my thesis. And so I had a strong selection of works that I could apply to residencies. So I applied to Studio Museum in Harlem, applied to Art OMI, and I applied to Lower Manhattan Cultural Council. And I got into all of them. And I was also doing it in a way to those specific residencies to honor a friend of mine who I passed on, Michael Richards. He was one of the artists, he was the artist that was in the World Trade Center, September 11, 2001. He told me, man, you need to apply to these places. Because he used to do residencies in Miami. And so I did that, not to honor him. And This was done at the Studio Museum in Harlem. This is called Bandit Gypsies. It took about a year because I was there for a year. Bandit Gypsies was Jimi Hendrix's last band that he organized himself, that he brought together. And this is a gypsy cab taxi divider. Most of the people who drive gypsy cabs in Harlem are immigrants with master's degrees, with PhDs, but because of language barriers, they often can't get proper documents. So I would befriend and know most of the gypsy cab drivers around the community, because that's where I was staying at. I was basically living inside the studio in Harlem, as many residents had before me, because of the cost of living being so high. My plan was to do residencies for the rest of my life, and to go from one to the other, to the other, to the other. And that's what I eventually ended up doing for 10 years. So these are images from those 10 years, more or less. So I went to the Studio Museum in Harlem, and then I went to Lower Manhattan Cultural Council, then I went to Headlands in Sausalito. If I didn't have those lined up, I'd be in the street. I would just knock on my mom's door and ask her if she'd take me back. If she would, but I wanted to see how far I could get. And so I lived in all the studios. When I was in grad school, I also lived in the studio. I just made a box with wheels on it that looked like furniture that I would slip inside and sleep inside. And yeah, I would videotape myself every night with a camera, have a journal. In case I got caught, they would think that I was doing a performance piece. You have to cover your behind, otherwise they toss you out. This piece I did at the core program in Houston, which is a residency at the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston. They take 7 visual artists and 2 curators, or writers, or poets. It's a great residency, one which had medical insurance, honorarium of $25,000 a year, and it's for 2 years. And so I did this large sculpture called A House at Frank Wright, built for Fred Hampton, Mark Clark, and La Plata. And eventually it was seen by the Whitney curators and invited to participate in the Whitney Biennial. And it's basically a labyrinth, a recreation of a house, a structure in Chicago, where 2 activists were executed in December 4th, 1969. This piece was made in 2006. Those 2 individuals were Fred Hampton and Mark Clark, who were both Black Panthers, one from Chicago, one from Peoria, Illinois. And the floor plan was done by William O'Neill, who was a Black Panther and FBI informant. So I had access to the floor plan from a book, Ages of Repression, by Ward Churchill, that book that I read many times. This is a second version of the piece. It was shown many times in different places, along with some of my works in the background. Most of my work is installation based. So you have a lot of little components and then one large piece. Smaller components activate the larger piece. It's basically a conversation. Then later on I went to art piece in San Antonio, right after the core. And by this time, I'm traveling so much, I don't keep anything. Only the clothes on me. And whatever works I create, the materials get donated to nonprofits, or I toss them out. This is titled Moby Dick. It's a police car sliced in half. And the interior is turned into a mobile library. And the exterior has tags of writers, authors, or activists, or people who were censored. You might see Fanon, Geronimo, Lapu-Lapu, Anyways. I didn't write them. I collaborated with a local graffiti artist. I gave him all these books. He read them, and then he incorporated and invented his own style for each writer or each activist. The interior did have the books of those authors named on the surface of the vehicle or activists. And this is a small picture of the interior. The car was self-sustaining, it had batteries in the trunk, so you could have coffee inside, lights and everything. But it wasn't really open to the public. The idea is that this car could be out in the street, unassuming, but you can live inside of it. The windows were tinted with, what do you call it, limousine tints that are extra dark, usually illegal for any other vehicles. So the light was not coming through from the interior. And while I was at the core program, I also designed this other project that was selected for a project in Spain later on, which is this piece. You guys familiar with Star Wars? The Millennium Falcon was named after the falcon. It's a vehicle, but also a sacred bird in Native American cultures, from South America to North America. So the title is Yawar Maku, Lando Landu. Yawar Maku is Aymara for blood of the condor, which is also a sacred bird to Andean people. It's also a title of a film from 1969 called Yawar Maku that is made by a Bolivian filmmaker, Jorge Santines, which you might want to look up. It's just in line with a lot of the things that are going through this particular piece, but also my work in general. And Lando Landu references Lando, which is Afro-Peruvian dance, and which originates in Angola, the Landu. And as a child, I saw this film, and I thought that Lando Calrissian was Peruvian, because I thought Tupac was Peruvian. And because of the word name Lando, but also because of the fact that he was the original owner of the Millennium Falcon. And in the first film, Han Solo states that when he hit, if you follow that first film, or fourth film, he hit his passengers underneath the floorboards. He said, "I never use this to smuggle people." But it's because it wasn't his ship to begin with, it was Lando's ship, which led me to believe that Lando was smuggling people in this sci-fi underground. And which prompted me to think about Henry Box Brown, who shipped himself to freedom in a wooden crate. So all these things came together, and the shape of the Millennium Falcon was just all made of different pieces of plywood from different former colonized countries. And it was built to scale, and it's activated with a lot of the components on the surface and underneath. And then after the exhibit came down, I donated all the wood to local artisans, local artists, and carpenters who might need it. And then I was doing also performance work. That same year, I was just holding up an original Black Panther newspaper. This is at McDowell Artist Colony in New Hampshire. And just doing a lot of photo performance work, as well as sculpture and other works. How they're presented is not what you would think. These are usually printed very small. I don't like to make spectacle of the imagery that I'm using, because that tends to happen a lot, especially with historical imagery of Black and brown people. This is another performance work that I did. Relating the kipu, which is a form of archiving information, data in Andean cultures, and sneakers tossed up. Those sneakers I specifically threw up there. This is at the McCall Art Center in Charlotte, North Carolina. And those are the sneakers right before I threw them up. And this is a collaboration with Andre Leon Gray, who's a photographer from North Carolina. And speaking of Tupac, here are the three Tupacs. The first Tupac from the 1500s, the second, Jose Condorcanqui Tupac Amaru from the 1700s, and the third Tupac Amaru Shakur from the 20th century. And this is a recent drawing. The scale is about the same as the projection. These are more images of works that I've done and how I install them. And these paint chip pieces are based on Andean tunics in Peru. And they're called rumimaki, which means fist of stone or hand of stone. And rumimaki is an Andean martial art that goes back over 1,000 years and is practiced in South America. And I was taught this when I was a child. So these pieces are based on different movements of rumimaki movements. There's some other ones here. Well, this is the rest of the installation. I'll even install my work. This is another work, more recent, of the use of scaffolding and coffee drawings. Now, by this point, I haven't done any more residencies. My last residency was really in 2014. After that, I felt I've evolved out of residencies. But what the residencies did was afford me time and space, but also generate a community that I could work with in those residencies, outside of the residency, in those cities that I visited and that I lived in for years. And I'm still in touch with them, and I still mentor a lot of the artists and young people who were going through those residencies themselves. Not as residents, but because a lot of them were in art centers. And also, doing art residencies tended to validate my practice without me really knowing that that's what it was doing. It also protected me from commercial galleries, because the temptation is there, but once you're in that, you turn into a thoroughbred, and that's how they treat you. You need to constantly produce and produce and produce. And that can be exhausting. And I've seen many people burn out because they choose that route. So I always stayed away from it. And I would kind of try it out here and there for a group show, but never a solo show. And just to put my work out there. Because it is important to put one's work out there. Because it changes when you put it in public than it is in your own personal studio space. It just changes completely. It allows you to give to get a perspective or to reflect on what you're doing when you show it outside of your circle. And so that's what the benefits of residencies. It used to be a lot of people thought that residencies are a waste of time because you're not putting your work out there. On the contrary, you cultivate your work in there, they protect the work, they validate the work, and they also bring in curators to see your work, or art historians or writers. And you need that, especially when you're just starting out, because later on, a lot of those curators or art historians or writers or PhD students are the ones that are going to be writing major essays or working in institutions that will benefit those artists that work with them early on. So it's a way of networking. And I didn't intentionally go into it knowing these things, but I realized it when the first I started working with residencies. Now I mostly donate my time, I volunteer, I donate work or funds to the residencies that I've done. And also just nominate people and mentor people to residencies. These are some of the last things. I do also a lot of graphic design work, but I don't use my name, I just use the word Tupa Nose Design, mostly for political activist groups. Yeah, they're always out there, just don't put my name on it. I designed this album. This is specifically a Philadelphia project that I did in 2021. It's a Young Lord's Party in the Black Panther Party in Philadelphia. I was audio recording, these are field recordings of the landmark locations where both of the chapters were in the city. And I burned the audio into a vinyl records. I made an edition of 3 vinyl records. And it had a poster with it. The vinyl jacket has the facade of the Young Lords building from 1971. The other side, which is not visible, is the Black Panther Party office from 1970. But in the interior, there's a photograph of what those spaces look like today, along with an essay. And there's a poster with the mostly geometry that was used within each party's newspapers, Palante newspaper for the Young Lords, and the Black Panther Party newspaper for the Black Panthers, along with some text in Spanish, because one of them is in Spanish, and the other one in English. And this is how it was presented, with a listening booth. And mostly what you hear is audio of the distinct communities. You hear cars passing by with different types of music, or radios, or people walking. You can hear the economy of sounds, like motor scooters or different trucks. Very different than you would in maybe other parts of the city. This is where we end. This is a more recent piece from earlier this year, and it's in keeping with the scaffoldings. This is more about bending time. It's an ancient piece. Some boombox drawings in the background. It's also part of the Lumimaki series. But this I did more so at home in South Florida. And these are just outtakes of other pieces. These are all martial art movements, still part of the same series. Maybe you're going to give you scale. This is my closing, which is a Creative Capital Grant that I've been working on this year. Stand up next to a mountain. This is a poster I designed, and I'm going to show you a 30-second trailer.
William Cordova, born in Lima, Peru, is a US-based cultural practitioner. Cordova's creative capital project, Stand Up Next to a Mountain, The Unknown History of Latino Black Panther Party Members, is a video documentation illuminating the unknown history of Latino members of the Black Panther Party between the years 1966 and 1982, whose public history and personal narratives remain completely unknown, but whose roles and contributions further add to the complexity of race, gender, ethnicity, and cultural paradigm. Cordova originally began his research on Latino, Asian, and Native American Panther members in 2005 when he was an artist in residence at the Studio Museum in Harlem. This project is unique in that it is the only document of Latino women and men who played a vital role as Black Panther Party members, struggling for human rights, equality, and power to the people.
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, William. It's open for questions. So folks, if you want to raise your hands, and William will call on you, and yeah.
I honestly describe myself as a cultural practitioner. I was wondering what does that mean for you?
What I wanted to do is not limit myself to just being a visual artist, too specific. And it's also more abstract to be a cultural practitioner. It's also not a cultural producer. Yeah, that's just a work. So it's important for me to not label myself to make a certain statement by conveying the fact that whatever I do and everything I do is part of a longer narrative that precedes me, and that I'm in a way responsible for. So yeah, that I adopted in during my first year of grad school, it was just a difficult time. At Yale at that time, there was very few artists of color in the art program. There was 4 of us, one in painting, one in sculpture, one in photography, and one in graphic design. So it was a very difficult time, and we created a collective at the time called the Base Collective. But in a way, it existed before then because some folks helped me to apply to get in. And then after we graduated, we also assisted other folks to getting into the program. And that kept going for about 10 years. So it was an unset collective, and we would go in, it just kept building. And a lot of these folks are very well known today. We just never announced it. We did it from the year 2000 to 2010. Yeah, there wasn't a lot of language around the things that we were interested in or that we were bringing into academia. There was no academia for no literature for a lot of the cultural elements that we were addressing, highlighting. Even music, like hip hop. That was the generation of artists who grew up a lot with hip hop. And when I say that, I don't mean that we were referencing music videos. We were referencing the scholarship that influenced the pioneers of hip hop, which was mostly the Black arts movement, or Black activists in the late 60s. So a lot of the hip hop music that we were listening to in the 80s, early 90s was either socially conscious or had a very specific agenda that eventually later on got co-opted by corporate industries. But in school, there was no understanding of what we were bringing into the program. And so we had to support ourselves or bring in faculty or individuals from other universities, from other cities. And eventually when we graduated, we started doing that ourselves, we would go in unannounced, pro bono, and do studio visits, just to help other students of color. By 2010, the program started diversifying, not only the students, but the actual faculty. And so things had changed by that point. And I think overall, in the tri-state area, things were changing more so. So we organized actually a project of our presence there from 2000 to 2010 last year. We did a survey of our collective in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, Lux et Veritas, which is the school ID, the art school. You can look at it. Anyway, I'm just reminiscing. Thank you for asking.
I have a question. So this is
Sorry.
Go ahead. And then we take over.
You mentioned that you do a lot of graphic design work. I'm also a graphic design major in my last year, and I'm considering whether I should go to grad school or do my master's or not. What's your take on that? If it's worth actually just pursuing a master's in graphic design, maybe taking anything other like road. Yeah.
Well, my question would be, where would you want to do that?
That's what I'm considering. Like,
because there are some programs that are that allow you to take, like your graphic design program at Yale. Not suggesting you go there, but the graphic design program at Yale is very interdisciplinary. Where the students there, my friend Jamari Kim started there, but she would take courses and classes and collaborate with us in the painting department. I was a painting major, but I never did any painting. I'm not a painter per se. I did more sculpture and then photography and just move around a lot. So in that example, she was able to gain a lot more from the experience, not only in that one program, but through all those programs. But then there are programs where you cannot deviate from that specific space. So it would depend on the school, the particular program. Because, yeah, if you can jump around and get the best of it. A program that you could probably do that is the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. No, I wouldn't go there. It's too isolating. In art school, go to an academic school where you can bounce off ideas and have other experiences with reality. Art school's a bubble. Yeah. Not putting the art school down, but if you're in the trenches, you know the difference.
You were in college for quite some time. Do you have any advice for students who get burnout or have artist block?
What year are you in?
I'm junior.
Okay. Ooh, one more year. Yeah. I have to know more background, but my 6-year experience was because I was a terrible student. I had no discipline, no structure. I had to unlearn a lot of things and learn how to properly study. I had a passion to stay in school, but I just didn't have the discipline. So that's why they didn't kick me out. But at the same time, eventually I learned after 3.5 years, and the last 2.5, I spent in the art department. And I never graduated. I just transferred with more than 100 credits. But yeah, when you say burnout, I'm not sure if it's because of all the requirements that you have to take for the first 2.5 years or 2 years. Or if it's too many projects that you've done, it's hard to tell. If you take a break, plan out how long you're going to take a break for. Yeah, just plan it out. I would stick it out. It's 1 more year. You're in what, your first year junior? Or, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So next fall you become a senior. Okay. It's hard to say. But what you feel today may not be what you feel tomorrow. They're just feelings, you know. Feelings go away. They're not real. They're not. Yeah, if I hit myself in the foot, I'm going to feel angry. It's going to go away eventually. So, not the sore, but the feeling. Yeah. Somebody had a question?
You talk a lot about how the black emphasis influenced your work, and your piece that was the floor plan, you said that was in the Whitney Biennial, right? What are your thoughts on I have 2 questions. My first question is, for that piece, was there a plaque that said explicitly the context for that piece, or did people just see a floor plan and it was more abstract without your context that you told us? And then my second question is what are your thoughts on political art in the context of large art institutions like the Whitney? I don't know, just because I have worked in museums and have seen firsthand the hypocrisy of how institutions can be so conservative, but then have these artists who are really progressive or who are big organizers, and there's you know what I mean, that I don't know, it's just such a conflicting thing. Am I making sense?
Of course.
Yeah, that art is so political and it's so progressive, but then the institution that's backing the piece or the exhibit is often an agent in whatever the problem is, you know?
Yeah. There was a plaque, there was a didactic.
Oh, cool.
When that piece was presented. I wrote part of it, and then the curators wrote the rest of it. And it was important to have that plaque. Yeah. The question regarding activism, politics in the Whitney Museum, I think it's a national situation because a lot of museums are becoming they're using a more corporate model to run their programs. And so airlines, corporations, or car corporations, as soon as something happens, somebody doesn't like a commercial, they fire everybody and hire somebody else, rather than sit down and talk about it. So a lot of times, our large institutions, not specifically to the Whitney Museum, but a lot of institutions, rather than have a sit down with the practitioners, the artists, the curators, or those involved, to really just talk about what the misunderstanding, what the problems are. They try to erase it, try to ignore it, hide it, and then it just blows up again, because it's going to come back. So it's difficult to sometimes work with institutions that are using that model, because you're talking to a wall. And when I did that project, that was in 2000, the Whitney Biennial was 2008 that I was in. It wasn't trendy to reference the Black Panther Party at that time. It wasn't trendy to reference the Young Lords Party. A lot of that came because of Black Lives Matters in the last 11 years. But back then, they didn't see it as a problem. Yeah, they just saw one of many projects in the space. Yeah, but that piece hasn't been presented again since 2018 because of the subject matter. I should add that that piece reflected also the assassination of Atahualpa, who was Inca king, who was placed in a room for 30 days by Pizarro and told to fill up the room up to a certain height with gold and silver. And he filled it up because they didn't think he would. And so he filled it up, but they executed him anyway because he was too influential. So I was thinking about that when I first read about Fred Hampton and Mark Clark, which was when I was in high school in Miami. But it took me just to go back to that because I wasn't pursuing the arts. Anyway, I was interested in connecting these things that were already connected. I was basically creating a constellation of historical points in time that we can relate to in one way or another. But they repeat themselves. Sometimes when we fall asleep. Yeah. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, great, thank you.
I just want to say that it's very empowering to see Latino artists in such a professional setting. I was just curious about how you apply and sort of found art residencies, especially because I'm concerned about my professional career after I graduate, because I'm also a junior. It's just something like that.
Your question was, how do you apply?
Yeah, where do you find them? You're going to make you recommend them?
There's, well, the Creative Capital has a website, and on it has a section that says grants and other art opportunities. It's a huge list, and they put one out every single month. So when I get them, I have a mass email, and I send it out to tons of people to take advantage of them. But depending where you might be interested in doing a residency, you can just go on a search engine and put free residencies or residencies in a certain city, and you'll get a couple. I would never propose you do any residencies where you have to pay a huge amount of money. Just the application. Because some of them are just free to apply. Yeah. Because some of them are more like vacation retreats. You know, they'll charge you $700 a week to be there. Yeah. I would never suggest somebody do that. Yeah. Also, if you do some that are really out in the sticks, those are more for working without being disturbed, like cohesion. If you do them more in the tri-state area that are in the cities, that's where getting a lot more feedback from curators, art historians, art writers, cultural critics, like that. And in that way, your work is going to get more attention. Yeah. And then you get invited to a lot more projects with that way. But also, the more people you know, when you decide to go to grad school, if you go to grad school, they can write your letter of recommendation. So you're aware of that. The benefits. Yeah.
You said you studied or wanted to study psych or medicine to help your family. Have you been able to find ways to do that, or you accepted that it was your responsibility to do that?
Oh no. Yeah, no, it's always been my responsibility. When I was 16, I lied and got a job at a supermarket so I could help my mom. And they fired me, but then we hired me a few months later when they found out, when I was 70, eventually. No, when I was in grad school, I lived in my studio and took out a $10,000 loan and gave it to my mom and just lived in the studio. When I graduated, I took out basically all the honorarium that I was getting and gave it to my mom. She was retired by then. She retired in 2000. And I just lived in the studio. I would sell artwork here and there, and that was enough for me. Yeah. When you're younger, you're able to do that. You know, don't eat for a day. Okay. I'm not saying do that, but I was willing to be in the trenches and just I wanted to do what I had to do to get where I needed to get, even though that wasn't very clear all the time. After the Whitney Biennial, I avoided commercial gallery representation in this country for a long time. After that, I felt I was okay to go with a commercial gallery, because by that point, I couldn't be branded by a commercial gallery. Sometimes you come out of nowhere, they brand you, they claim you burn out, they toss you out. But if you take other steps before that and go through our residency, they start validating you, and then you'll practice. You come in through the side, through the nonprofit. The Whitney Biennial was really beneficial for my practice because they showcased my work without having any kind of affiliation to any commercial thing. And so after that, I was approached by the only gallery that I wanted to work with at the time, and that I still work today. So after that, I invested the money that I received in real estate, and I bought my mama house. And so, yeah, so take care of it. Thank you for asking.
I have two questions. So, one being, what was the most valuable thing that you learned during or from your residencies? And the second one was, did anything that you were learning in college transfer over to the real world?
Yeah. The real world was always real for me when I was in undergrad and grad and thereafter. Those things never changed. The only time that it was a little magical, when I say magical, I mean falling into a hole and believing that you're in La La Land, was when I was at the School of the Arts Institute of Chicago. Because time stops there. There's nothing other than self-referential art. And that's okay for a while, but that's not reality. But I didn't live in that reality. I lived outside of the school. And if you live outside of the school, it's not the same as being in the dorms. What I wanted to do is extend my experience in grad school, my studio practice experience, extend it forever, which is an illusion, but it was something to start with. So I thought, if I go from my studio practice in school straight to a residency that's a year long, and then another residency that's a year long, I'm going to keep going forever. It never stops, and just be as productive as I want to be, without any obligation, without ever getting a day job. I had backups. I had a little bit of savings. A friend of mine who was willing to hire me at junior college in Miami. But I wanted to try and see how far I can get away from this and avoiding paying my loans back. Yeah. What was the second part?
The second one was, what was the most useful thing you have learned during or from your residency?
The residency community. Cultivating community is extremely important, and that's why I keep going back. Yeah, I'm completely dedicated to it. Mentoring evolved out of doing residencies, because I was one of the few privileged to be in a residency program. Sure, I had to apply and and try really hard to get in, but the benefits being in there and the access to resources that you have, other people should have it. And a lot of times, residencies do not accept anybody locally. They'll accept, not necessarily in New York, but outside of New York. So what I did was to start building bridges, start organizing shows in the residency with those people who are not being included. and I still do that. I just don't say I do, I just do it. So that would be the answer to my second.
Just in addition to that, residencies are highly competitive as well. This is a question I wanted to ask before the student talks about residency. And this is for the students really. Just can you speak to some of the things that you've probably learned as someone who's probably done a ton of applications? Because within applying and getting residencies within a span of 10 years, it's about civil rejection letters that you receive, right? And so do you want to speak to maybe some of the strategies or things that might be helpful for students who might be interested in looking at residencies moving forward, whether they're things, whether they're best practices or any tips that you could give that would be helpful to them? And this is what we
Yeah, we could do a whole workshop on this, and I do that in usually when I do residencies, I'll extend myself and just do workshops and just invite whoever wants to participate, and I'll show them step by step. The don't is, don't document your work in your front yard unless it has to do something with your front yard. But also don't isolate your work to the point where it looks like it's coming out of a Home Depot catalog, where it's just living and floating in neutral space. It has to be contextualized. It needs to be grounded in a space. Another beneficial thing about doing residencies is that they usually come with a gallery space. So I would photograph my work in the gallery space when there was nothing there. Come time to apply for something or to get a studio visit, I show them those things. It looks really professional rather than my small little tiny studio. Applying for residencies can be like applying for a job. You do the research about where you're going to apply to, who's done the residency before, what kind of jurors have been there, and shape your answers to the questions that are being asked, also based on the value system of those residency programs. Because some of them have specific ideas of what the residency program is and who it's for. So sometimes certain artists do not want to be isolated in the bush, like Sohegan or McCall, McDowell. So somebody might not think about those things. You apply, they'll look at it like, this guy is never going to get in here because they want to have all these access to all these resources that we don't provide. They're providing a cabin in the sticks. So you have to do a little bit of homework, a little read, a little bit about what the residencies are about and what their focus is. Mostly I stress in writing a proper art statement, like not saying I or me, but finding other ways of expressing and developing your sentences, and using references, using other practitioners to reference that relates to your work, or writers. Images, we live in the digital age, so there should be no reason why we have, we don't have good imagery, good documentation. But I still sit in juries, and I see a lot of really bad digital photography. Not photography per se, but documentation. Yeah, some of it's too dark, color correct images. It doesn't take that long, just one button. I know these sound simple and silly, but they can make you and break you. I don't believe in the idea of like a competition. I've said that before. Competition's in here. If you don't get in, it isn't necessarily because you have terrible images or somebody else's is better. There's too many variables that go into it. Yeah. There's a lot of politics involved in it too. But Yeah, after a while, I figured out a formula to apply to residencies, and just follow that formula, and I kept getting in them back to back. I say that now, I don't do them anymore, and it's part of the reason why I gave them up, because I was taking up somebody else's space, and I didn't want to do that anymore. It just didn't seem right. So, pretty much stopped. The only ones that I've been accepting is those that I was just asked to do. And that's it. But if you're going to ask me back, I'll do a workshop. I'm just kidding. But yeah, there's just so many benefits to documenting the work. You guys have access to gallery spaces, whether you're in graphic design or painting or any other major. Use those spaces, set up your work, document it really well. You can apply to grants that way. Yeah. I use the same application images, the same ones, for about 4 years. I was still documenting my work, but I used my thesis show to apply to Studio Museum in Harlem, Art of Mind, Lower Manhattan Cultural Council, Evans, the core program, and I was nominated for Art Base. So, yeah. And it's not because I went to Yale. No, I learned a lot of these things at Student Museum from the interns, the people that work there that helped me. They refined my application. They helped me clean myself up and know how to do it, and just paying attention too. Because it was either, if I don't get in, I got to fly back home and get a job.
Any last questions? Thanks so much, everyone, for the thoughtful questions, and to William for the wonderfully thoughtful lecture. So,
thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.